All right, we're live. Welcome everybody to this week's Lean Lunch by Moves the Needle. My name is Aaron Eaton. I'm Principal Innovation Catalyst here at Moves the Needle. We focus on helping enterprises to have their employees behave more like entrepreneurs through application of lean startup principles, design thinking, customer development, all these types of things. We help companies that oftentimes you'll see problems in your company around being able to balance being able to execute in your core business versus being able to innovate, and oftentimes that ends up being really siloed. You end up with a specific team that's really tasked with innovation, and we believe that innovation is everyone's responsibility, and so we really strive to help drive that through large enterprises in many different industries. This week we have the pleasure of Jeff Zias from Intuit joining us. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Hi, thank you, Aaron.
And co-hosting with me today will be Rick Swanson.
Hi, everyone.
Why
don't you guys introduce yourselves really quick?
Okay, I'm Jeff Zias. I've been at Intuit 9 years, and my current role is Intuit's leader of grassroots innovation, and that includes things like our corporate incubation and running an Unstructured Time program across the company. It also means that I had the pleasure of overlapping a lot with and working with you, Aaron, when you were here, and the other people who are very lean, experimentation-oriented and driving that in the company.
Very exciting to get to reconnect with you. Thanks. And how about you, Rick?
My name is Richard Swanson, but my friends call me Rick. I am a former CEO that has built 2 Inc. 500 companies to over 500 million in sales. And in my most recent reincarnation, I have decided to help large enterprises bring the lean startup principles into the enterprise. And I work with Moves the Needle as a lean startup coach.
And then later, a little bit later on in the show, after we get done interviewing Jeff, we're going to get a chance to do some coaching with Becca and her team. So I'll give Becca a quick chance to introduce herself since she was on nice and early, and then we will dive into our interview with Jeff.
Hi, I'm Becca. I'm an intern at Intuit. I'm in business school. I go to HBS for business school, and I'm excited to tell you guys about our idea and hear your feedback.
Beautiful. Thanks for joining us. All right, cool. So a couple Moves the Needle upcoming events. We are going to be out next week in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We've got a client event, but then in addition, on August 1st, we'll be conducting a workshop with the ACRJ out there, which is basically like their I'm spacing the name of what the local interpretation of that organization would be, but that's actually going to be a public event open for entrepreneurs. So if you're an entrepreneur out in the Rio area, please get a hold of us so you can join us at that event. And we've got some time available the rest of the week, so please do connect with us. We'd love to meet up with folks while we're out there. August 1st, we will have Chief Operation Officer Seth Berkowitz from Edmunds.com on the Lean Lunch, so join us for that to hear how all about you can integrate innovation into your operations. And then on August 5th, we will be doing a webinar with a group called Unleash WD, focused on helping large organizations really overcome the problem of having too many customers and not really knowing where to focus and help them get really specific about finding a good starting point. So lots of good stuff coming up, and enough promotions. Let's dive into learning as much as we can from Jeff while we've got him, and get going from there. So I'm going to start out with a little high level here, Jeff. Can you give us a little background about yourself? How did you end up being working your way to being the grassroots innovation leader for Intuit?
In a very strange and circuitous way, an odd path led me to this, but it had a lot to do with exploring what I really cared about in life, what I was passionate about, and where I could marry my strengths with, things I enjoyed and where there was actually a need for something that matched up with what I enjoyed. But first of all, actually, if you need somebody to carry your experiment maps to Brazil with you next week, just let me know. That sounds like a great trip. Be happy to do that. But that gets a little bit to the answer, which is, for me, innovation coaching, working with small teams of people, helping them develop awesome products is the best way to spend the day. That's a fantastic day if I come in and meet with teams and we make progress together, and make progress in the sense of we're getting closer, tangibly closer, with a good plan to delighting customers. And I think, again, we're all birds of a feather here. Lean experimentation and all the principles from lean startup are extremely important. So when I discovered Eric's book, and actually even before that, our co-founder Scott Cook had blogged about this amazing guy he saw speak at a Web 2.0 conference, and it was Eric Ries, and he was talking about Steve Blank and customer development and a whole new way of approaching product development, a way in which you would actually build something that customers want. That sounded intriguing because I'd already had enough of a career at Apple Computer and a few startups to see that quite often you go build something that nobody wants, and it's a very expensive proposition. So I saw what lean was about, and on another parallel track that is now converged, when I saw what I call autonomy, mastering purpose was all about. So things like a Google 20% time program, and then our own kickoff of a similar program at Intuit over 8 years ago, roughly 8 years ago, I saw that, wait a minute, there's a marriage here that I really care about. I really care about employees coming in and feeling emboldened and given permission to take time to do what they're really passionate about. And then marrying that with lean principles, I think leads to a form of corporate incubation as well as regular small startup incubation and entrepreneurism that we actually haven't seen before. I think this is a breakthrough for the industry. And again, that's probably why we're sitting here. We don't need to convince one another, but there's some very powerful new tools and approaches out there that companies can use and are using.
Absolutely. That's great. Thanks for that. Definitely on board with all of that. Why don't you quickly introduce your book? Let's talk about that for a moment, and then we'll find some connections between all of that.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think my book comes from the concept of eat your own dog food, and I hadn't thought about the bad animal pun there, but that's unintended. So what I did about 10, 11 months ago was thought, you know what, I don't want to be quote unquote academic about the coaching we do and about our grassroots innovation program. I want to keep doing these things, innovating myself, using our tools to see if it does work. Are there obstacles? Are we asking people to do strange and unnatural and difficult things and just wagging our finger when they say it's difficult? Or, is this really a great approach, doing things like using your unstructured time to just try something you're passionate about, run experiments? So I decided I've been doing my own unstructured time projects all along, and they tended to be in the area of either kicking off new programs, like you did, Aaron. You and Ben Blank went ahead and decided you were passionate about the whole company getting better at lean experimentation. And I'm talking to you as if you don't know, but for everyone else's benefit, in your unstructured time, you just decided to launch a whole new program. So you actually did process innovation and training and education and stoking the entrepreneurial pipeline for the whole company. You developed that out of your own passion. So I'd done some similar things with unstructured time. I had worked on product teams to innovate in my unstructured time. But I thought, what could I do that's really, really challenging so I can see what it's like to go through the ringer? And I thought, I don't know anything about Kickstarter, so let me give that a shot. So in a nutshell, I decided to try a Kickstarter, and I thought I was going to do some kind of product. But then when I read all the literature on Kickstarter, they really push you to be artistic and do something that's an artistic, innovative project, which isn't bad. So I looked over the possibilities and I thought, hey, wait a minute, maybe I could do an innovation book that's artistic as well. Now the only problem is I have no art ability whatsoever. But people tell me I can write a little bit, So then I tried out another concept, which is what I call the gig economy, which is, hey, if you can't do something yourself, but you fancy yourself the producer, or somebody who has good ideas. I certainly always fancy myself with having interesting ideas, whether anybody else actually finds them interesting or not. But the whole idea would be to experiment with that. So I actually brought my MVP of the book. It's still laying around the family room at home, and decided what I'll do is I'll see if Kickstarter can kick this thing off. And of course, one aspect of Kickstarter is a dry test. If you put out your short video and your 3 paragraphs, does nobody in the world notice, or does anybody care? And I felt I need to actually hire some artists to do this concept of talking about animals in an analogous forum to innovation methodology. So I decided, well, this whole Hippo thing that's already being talked about in meeting rooms across Silicon Valley, at least, highest paid person's opinion. So that's what the Hippo came from. We're sick of these leaders coming in and telling people exactly what to do in a prescriptive form where it's just their opinion, and they've robbed the whole team of any sense of motivation and autonomy. And it's probably a bad idea anyway, because if you were to quote Eric Ries in a very important and poignant point, he sometimes starts off with the, hey, all your ideas suck. And now go prove which ones actually work for people. So I think that's a wonderful challenge that fights the Hippo notion. So my thought was, hey, what if I could do something that sounds immature on the surface, but I like watercolors, so maybe I can get someone to do watercolors for 26 animals. I already got H covered. H is the Hippo. What if there were different animal acronyms, for every different set of concepts? So I happened to turn to the pig page. I don't know if I need to do a whole screen share and show you any of the book, but the idea is that I described this in the Kickstarter, of course, before I had built anything, and I wanted to raise $1,900 because I figured I really need an artist, and I have to admit I need an editor because I spew out some interesting sentences here and there. So the $1,900 would cover it, and again, some people came up to me and said, that's ridiculous, you're not destitute living out of your car, why are you taking people's money to do a book? But of course I wanted to learn, and I wanted to be able to pay artists and editors as well. So it worked out. The thing funded just barely, made it by the seat of my pants, and I thought I was done, and then I started getting feedback. Now most of my Kickstarter supporters gave feedback like, the book is beautiful, or I love the pictures, can I get another one? Which isn't a bad thing. It's actually quite complimented. But then I did get some feedback that, hey, these stories about innovation that align with each animal acronym are pretty interesting. I thought, well, maybe I should learn about Kindle. Maybe I should learn about self-publishing. And maybe if I can do this thing, and somebody tells me, hey, I don't have time for Unstructured Time, I'm busy, and then I throw well, I'm busy too, but I wrote a book in my Unstructured Time, which often offends people. But I think the point is I'm using it myself, and I'm saying, well, when you produce something, what's it take then to get a business unit to support you? Or in my case, what's it take to have the corporate communications people say, yeah, we like this, we'll support it, which they do, and have my manager and colleagues, and luckily in my case, even our CEO, quite enthusiastic about the book and what it says and the message it sends about innovation. So I'm now in the process of getting a print version actually done. I've been experimenting in the Kindle channel for a while, learning things. I'm sticking with doing it all myself. So as Dan Pink once told us, if you're an author and once you've written the book, you think you're done, you've actually just finished maybe the second inning, as you all know with your writing and Moves the Needle and Lean Entrepreneur. So now I'm learning about the marketing, which I'm inherently very bad at, but I'm learning about it and starting to execute it in my Unstructured Time and actually developing enthusiasm for, what's it take? Hey, can I reach out to famous authors and get blurbs from them, and then from other people, and can I read Tim Graal's book about book marketing, which I highly recommend, by the way, and learn these new skills all in my unstructured time, while at the same time hopefully benefiting Intuit, where there's this literature out there about how to innovate, albeit in a fairly fun form and surrounded by haikus and watercolors, just because I like easy reads myself. And it seems like some other people like that as well. But it should be good for the company as well. Maybe not as good as a new billion-dollar mobile app, which would be very good, and we do have successes coming through the pipeline. But, you know, what can I produce? You know, what this last year, what could I go out there and produce given the skills I have and the things I'm most passionate about, which turn out to be innovation, just the topic of innovation and how to coach people on innovation.
When I'm talking to other companies about how they can be more effective at innovating, oftentimes the topic of unstructured time or that type of program inside the company tends to come up, and I think a lot of innovators in other companies that maybe don't have access to something like that tend to use it as an excuse. They say, well, you know, those Intuit guys, they've got access to that unstructured time, and I don't have that, so I can't be effective. What's your response to that?
Well, I think the notions of unstructured time have been around under different labels and are part of human nature. So these notions, as you know, I'm a huge Dan Pink fan, and when I read his book Drive, I thought it resonated exactly with our line of thinking around unstructured time. And what he did was roll up a bunch of recent social science research saying, here's what motivates people to do the most creative / innovative, in my mind, work they've ever done. And we're not talking about boring, repeatable tasks that everybody did back in the 1800s. For the most part, we're talking about modern workers who presumably are highly trained and can come in and do things that add some special value that really takes creativity and, you know, the cliches of thinking outside the box and adding special value that's unique. And it turns out that people need to have these three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose, aligned with what they're doing to do their best, most creative work. And the other part of the thesis is that's what's important to corporations now. You know, if what you're doing is, as Jeffrey Moore would call, context, or just run-of-the-mill, just get it done, that's going to be outsourced if it hasn't already been outsourced. And that's going to go to the gig economy or overseas or people who are inherently lower paid. You need to come in and be doing work that differentiates and provides special value that people can't otherwise get. So that's where this notion of autonomy, mastery, and purpose comes from. That is essentially now the slogan of Unstructured Time, which is tap into your passion. And you know, we feel that if we give people time and freedom to tap into their passion, great things will happen. Like they'll drive growth, and they'll drive personal growth. You know, I learned things from writing my book. I learned things from doing mobile apps a couple of years ago. Now, I will admit that when people don't have any structure for this in their company, they have to go more what I would call, you know, the Stephen Covey Quadrant 2 approach. And I don't know if that's useful for everybody, but Stephen Covey came out with an amazing model basically saying, you know, by habit, people will come into a job and, you know, I paraphrase this as firefighting. People will come in and just be answering the emails and answering the phones and kind of like running around and trying to do the things to keep their head above water. And those things tend to feel like emergencies, and they're often not even the highest priority. And what you really need to do, and he wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People decades ago, what he was pointing out is you need to really prioritize and think about what's most important and take that time to step back and be in this other quadrant. And I won't draw or explain the whole, you know, 4 quadrants, but 4 parts of, but, you know, essentially quadrant 2 is the good, important stuff, which is it's not emergency, but it's highly important. And so this is what Unstructured Time gives you. So if you're not fortunate enough to be at one of these companies that say, yes, we want the most creative, most productive 20x type employees, coming in excited about what they're doing every day, and whether it's their structured job or their unstructured project, they are just cooking. You know, they are just doing incredible work. If you don't have executives and a program set up that supports that notion, I would still say, well, support the notion of being the most effective person in life you can be. And look at what Stephen Covey said, which is, think about what's important, carve out that time, get better at prioritization, and take that time to strategize and tap into your passion, and just overall be much more effective in life.
I think those are great points, Jeff. I think another book that helps entrepreneurs is a book by Michael Gerber. It's several decades old, but it's called Emyth. And in that book, it speaks to the point that you're talking about, how people tend to run around putting out fires all day long. And he differentiates by this simple point that I've always remembered, and that is, are you working in your business or are you working on your business? Too often we get pulled into the micro day-to-day of our work, and that's working in your business. But when you're innovating and you're thinking about things that will help grow your company, you need to be working on your business, which is different types of work. So great point that you made there. Both of those writers made excellent points that we all can learn from.
You know, I'll throw in, that's really helpful, and I think the reason some of these notions have been around for quite a while, and by the way, 3M really capitalized on this going back to the 1920s. Actually, part of what I enjoy is a little bit of research around the things I care about, and I found that, you know, masking tape came from a guy just defying his boss and playing around in the lab back in the 1920s. Essentially, his boss at that time basically first told him to stop. So then he made all his orders for equipment, you know, fall under the finance guideline of needs to be reported to your manager, and made about 200 orders for materials to experiment with masking tape. Came up with it, made it work, and then his CEO came back and patted him on the back. This is the classic story, but to 3M's credit, even back then in the 1920s, their CEO basically said, yeah, you know, let's let our scientists run free, and they actually formalized that as 15% time in 1948. So I think on some level, people who've been thoughtful about the work they do, this, even without the scientific proof and how the brain works and all the things like our modern writers like Dan Pink work in and reference, people know it's inherently true. You know, these are important things. Now, to Aaron's point of people in the industry bringing up, how do you do this? Oh, it's easy for you lucky people, where your CEO talks about Unstructured Time and whatnot. Yeah, there's an advantage, but what we won't get to in this call is there are actually details of how to coach this and how to make it operational and how to help people use it. So a lot of times we get questions like, all this high-level stuff, great, but I get all this high-level stuff about lean and then about your corporate culture, and what are the details? Tell me. So, you know, I think that's where a lot of us come in with, here's a blog, here's a playbook, here's a book, here's a consulting service, here's a coaching session that help people get to the details.
There's one thing that really struck me from reading through the advanced copy of your book that you sent over, and you've already touched on hippos a little bit, but the idea that you had in there is about converting hippos to apes, and I'm curious if you can kind of tee up. You talked a little bit about hippos already, so if you can tee up a little bit about apes and why it's so important to convert hippos to apes and how you go about doing that. I think that'll sort of punctuate what you guys were just talking about.
Well, I'm not sure I need to say anything, Aaron. I'm sure converting hippos to apes is self-evident and obvious. No, so the context is that the ape chapter, again, you know, there's a few people I immediately learn from the minute their books come out, and you know, attend sessions with and get on a phone call or email chain with whenever I can. I mentioned Dan Pink as one of them, and I mentioned autonomy, purpose, and mastery. So I went ahead and boldly twisted and hopefully didn't ruin his model. So an ape is autonomy, purpose, and excellence. Excellence being somewhat close to mastery. So I did my sleight of hand with that. So the ape is all about setting up this culture and this thought process around, you know, you got to do things that are aligned with your purpose to do your best work. So first of all, have a sense of what your purpose in life is. There's all sorts of decades of self-help books and you know, road less traveled and just thought processes around there. It's very important. You know, if we're purpose-driven in our life, we're going to be more enthusiastic. We're going to do better things. Autonomy is this notion, which I hadn't really clicked down into yet, which is, you know, when you're doing something that your boss didn't tell you to do specifically, you actually do much better work. In fact, the really interesting study there was one of non-commissioned artists. So it turns out, you know, they ran a study where a panel of art experts was ready, but they went ahead and commissioned some artists to do some pieces, and then they asked some other artists to just, you know, submit what they had, no commission. The work, the creativity level and artistic quality judged from the non-commissioned artists was much higher. So it's just one bit in the chain of evidence that we actually do our better work when, you know, we feel a stronger sense of autonomy. And so if Aaron were to, you know, somehow come from Tucson to here in Mountain View, stand over my shoulder, tell me to do something, and then be looking over my shoulder, I can guarantee you I'd be doing some pretty awful work. Whereas if he gave me a challenge, like, you know what, it'd just be absolutely interesting to have the following, some kind of innovation tool that helped people blank. Then I would have a constraint. Innovation loves constraints, but I would also have so much freedom that I could throw all my own jujitsu into it and do what I really cared about and just feel much better about my work process and actually come up with much better work than if I'm exaggerating, but if he were looking over my shoulder and being very prescriptive about the task. So that's the A. And excellence is this concept of, it can be highly motivational to really challenge yourself with a bar set very high. It's related to mastery. Getting better at the things we care about is actually a strong motivator. So the ape is the animal that encompasses all these things. So when you push back on a hippo, you want to essentially train them to understand that apes is what they want as subordinates and colleagues. In a nutshell, that's skipping a lot of fancy prose, but that's a lot of differentiation in the book. Is what's a good animal? You know, ape's one of the best animals. Autonomy, purpose, and excellence. You want to be the ape. Hippo? No, you want to try to tame the hippo. They're going to ruin your life.
I love the analogies that your use of animals creates as a result. It's really it was really kind of twisting my brain around as I was reading through things.
That's great. Nobody's called me juvenile yet. I was afraid of that, but so far so good.
Yeah, exactly. I've got one more question. So I'd love to. I think this is one that's right up Rick's alley as well. So in the Viper chapter, you provided a story about a team that really kind of embodied that, a sales team that embodied a lot of the Viper capabilities. Can you tee that up and just share that story with us? I think that's a wonderful one to really showcase, kind of a lot of these concepts together and show folks the value that they'll get out of learning the concepts in this book and applying them.
Yeah. So I'll add the notion. I had forgotten the haiku there, but the idea is that there's hopefully an engaging watercolor for each chapter. There's a haiku that kind of captures the essence of the innovation lesson, and then there's in almost every case a real world story that I was able to get some in-depth research on. So the Viper is pretty straightforward for us. Can I call us lean geeks? Is that okay? But
yeah,
so you know, the Viper pulls in a few different examples, and I actually have to, you know, look at the book a little bit to remember each one. But
No worries.
I did go back to the Thomas Edison example. You know, so testing over 1,600 materials. So, you know, before getting a filament that doesn't burn out. I mean, that's perseverance. That's, you know, so that I think that's a good part of the lesson. You know, there's a example I throw in about the Toyota Corporation and what they had to do with early experimentation, you know, on a nav system. I think they did a really interesting thing there, which is they embraced the notion of lean experimentation, and they ended up essentially taping an iPad to the console of the car and making it look like. So it's not exactly a Wizard of Oz, right? It's certainly not a concierge, but in terms of the minimum viable product. But they're a big corporation. They could have gone and off and done a $500 million experiment for 8 years because navigation's fairly important, right? But instead, they taped a tablet, you know, to the dashboard and tried out some things. So I thought that was another good example. In this particular chapter, I throw in 4 or 5 examples rather than going deep on one. But the Viper has, you know, very important prioritized experiments rule. That's how the acronym works there. It's all about, look, there's a lot of evidence that lean experimentation and teaching yourself how to think in that way can be quite important, you know, either to a startup or a very big company. That's where I think, you know, Toyota's, it's pretty interesting that they would have some anecdotes about doing a $20 experiment.
I love it. Yeah, I think that's you know, an area that a lot of companies have room to get better, which is that they understand the concept of experimentation, but I think they don't take the time necessary to get creative about really applying, you know, putting themselves in a constrained position where they have to get creative and come up with something, you know, on a $20 budget or those types of things. And so they naturally think, we've got the resources of a multi-billion-dollar company. We can go run this 6-month experiment. It's totally cool, when actually there's more benefit in constraining yourself.
Absolutely. That's, you know, what you said touches on part of the Innovators Dilemma. Yeah, and this mindset that we have power and time and money, yeah, it's not helpful. It can be a killer.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you, Jeff. That was wonderful. I hope that folks take some significant value away from our conversation, and definitely check out the Innovation Animals book. Where can folks find out about that, Jeff?
They can go to Amazon and type in Innovation Animals, or go to my website, jeffzias.com. And of course, you know, that's the main deliverable on my website right now.
Nice. Well, good luck with that. And let's go ahead and it looks like our Triumph team is online. So why don't we shift over into coaching mode? Anybody got any final thoughts or things you want to throw out before we shift over to coaching? Cool. Then let's do that. So why don't the folks from Team Triumph go ahead and introduce yourselves real quick and let us know how we can help.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said before, I'm Becca. And my colleagues, Alex Smith and Tuan Ha, are also on the line. And we're interns at Intuit, and we're working on an Unstructured Time project right now for the summer. And we have a question that has to do with trying to execute a lot of tests. We've been doing a ton of testing, but we've struggled with reaching tests that are valid for our target customer and not just testing kind of within our own network, and reaching kind of big enough tests that we can like draw data and decide whether to pivot or persevere based on it. So I guess the really quick overview of what we're doing is we wanted to try to solve payday loans, you know, those really high interest short-term loans that people will take out to try to get through to the end of the month, people who are low income or are living paycheck to paycheck, and maybe their car breaks down, they don't have enough in their bank account. And right now there aren't a lot of other options if you don't have good credit to get money when you're in a financial crisis. And we were sort of talking at the beginning of the summer about what we wanted to work on, and we thought it would be really great to try and leverage the power of the community in this situation, where maybe no one individual could help that person out in a crisis, but the whole community probably could come together and get people through their financial crises. And that's what sort of led us to our solution, which is HelpLo, a micro-lending platform to help you access funding from a community in a financial crisis. And so we've done a lot of testing around, are people willing to lend money to others that they're sort of tangentially connected to? And, are you willing to lend money to people in your network? We know that people want to borrow money when it's cheaper and easier to get. But what we don't really know now is how to take those learnings from a big variety of communities and expand testing within our target customer group, so lower income people or people living paycheck to paycheck. This is not a customer group that we are necessarily in, so we're trying to understand, what can we draw from tests that we've done within our personal network that we can take as learnings moving forward with our solution? How do we reach our target customers and do testing within those networks? How do we understand, how to test a network-based solution when we're not in the networks of the target customers? So we'd love to hear your feedback and sort of what you suggest given what we're thinking about.
Got it. So I have one clarifying question. So in that description, you're saying that all of the lightweight tests that you guys have run so far are not necessarily on the target customer segments that you're hoping the final product will be for. So you've got some sort of triangulation data that shows that you're in the right ballpark, but not necessarily data that shows that this specific customer segment will exhibit the behaviors you're after. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Okay, cool. Jeff and Rick, any other follow-on questions you guys have got?
No, I think that was the key question.
One question I have before diving into, what probably should be modeling how we go about coaching a team. So we'll probably step back and say, this is meta, here's what we're doing now. But so, as Aaron said, he's already doing some clarifying questions. So I think it's a really interesting area, and I love that you're inspired by people really in need that don't have a current good solution. The current solution sounds awful, right? And you laid that out nicely. One thing I don't understand about borrowing from a community, so if one of us were in need, are we borrowing from a community, in your vision, are we borrowing from a community of people we know, or could it be a hybrid, people we know, people we don't know, or people associated in some particular way? What's your point of view on that in terms of how your idea works?
That's actually one of the things that we were thinking about testing, is how do we define community? Is it something like an online network of friends, like on Facebook? Is it geographic, based on your neighborhood? Or is it something more specific, like a church group or like a sports team? So that's one aspect of the problem that we haven't been able to test sufficiently, and one of the things that we were hoping to get coaching on today.
Right. That's helpful to lay out. So one of the things we do, and thankfully you participated in the Unstructured Time innovation program for all the interns. So you've some amount of coaching throughout the summer, but also doing a great new fantastic innovation is often not easy. So yeah, there's a lot of thoughts to go through. One question then would be, what I just heard sounded like a pretty good list of assumptions about what the community is. Am I right to infer that you've kind of thought through these assumptions, and these are a list of things that you might want to experiment with in terms of, the term split test came to mind, by the way, too. You might have different ideas out of this list of assumptions as to what that community has to be. Is that a fair way of paraphrasing how you were thinking about these aspects of the community?
Yeah, that's totally fair. I'm sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Sorry. I was just going to say that that's pretty accurate. We've looked at our own Facebook friends. We've also run a test in San Jose using Nextdoor, which is a social network for neighborhood. So we've tried two different methods, and we're looking to run a test at the Menlo Park Presbyterian Church, I believe. So we're trying to access these different communities, but we are running into difficulty because we aren't really in this target demographic that we're trying to solve a problem for, and it's tough to sort of understand these people and reach out to them because we don't really understand the problem as well as we'd like to.
Can you talk a little bit about? I think you hit on actually the key piece of information you guys need to move forward, which is understanding that customer, understanding them really well, right? So, can you talk about where those folks are hanging out, where you might find them? Like, what have you interacted with any of the folks that are using payday loan services at all yet?
So we spent some time actually at one of the payday loan establishments in Redwood City, basically just camping outside, kind of advertising a lower interest rate service just so we can get some traffic to come to talk to us to learn more about what payday borrowers are actually looking for and kind of understanding kind of more or less their plight. We didn't have a ton of data points to gather from that one experience, and so that's something we're working on trying to get some more data for. We also did an application form for a lower collective lending service as well, where we actually had some feedback from people that signed up for this type of service, and actually got some information in terms of what they've used for other options, whether it be friends and family for borrowing, or if they reached out for other types of lending before that as well. So we have some tangential data points, but not a ton of data on the customer.
Much better than nothing, though. That's good. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Oh, no, I think that's really valuable to see that you've already captured someone, maybe not in the moment of need, the way you're describing it, but the real target user, at least in the process or close to that moment of need. So related to that, I think a big part of stepping back a moment, coaching teams is, do we know how to even be helpful, what the team's looking for as a coach? But you did such a great job describing that up front, Becca. That was very clear and specific what you wanted help with. And then when we end the session, just an inside view at Intuit, what we like to do is ask, how was that for you, and are you feeling more or less enthusiastic or passionate about your project now? With the thought being that if as coaches we're coming in and doing a Hippo-like thing, which we covered earlier, then you might actually be decreased in passion. But what's really important is, if you're going to make this thing work, or if any entrepreneur is going to make something work, the amount of energy and persistence that has to happen is amazing. So, we want to help teams be more passionate over more time to really get there. The passionate innovation team is going to do better than, regardless of almost anything else, do better than any other team that's not quite as enthusiastic and as inspired to continue. So anyway, stepping back from that, that's a reason for this question of what do you feel is most important to learn right now, and specifically for whom? And I understand you have a network effect with multiple edges, so there's kind of a person who needs the money, and there's a community that lends. But specifically in your mind, what would you love to be able to learn from those two edges right now?
Like you said, it's sort of a two-sided problem. I think we have a better handle on the people who are willing to lend. That's what more of our tests have been around. I think what we really want to understand is, to Alex's point, how close do they need to feel to a person in order to kind of make that $5 or $10 in drop that in the bucket. And then on the borrower side, I think is where we're struggling more because, to this network problem, we're not really there. And we really want to understand what's driving them to take out these payday loans, what do these needs look like, and then is it a loan solution that's best for them? Like what about repayment? Are they going to feel uncomfortable if they can't repay, or if they fall into more financial trouble if they've taken out money from friends and neighbors? Or conversely, are they more likely to repay because they feel more of an affinity because it's people in their neighborhood or people from their church? And those are things we we don't really know now because we haven't figured out the best way to test within that group.
Right. And, you know, this is a little bit of a short session for coaching, not to make an excuse, but just to throw out a couple things that might have to be follow-up work afterwards. But, you know, something I learned from Scott Cook is a 7-to-1 type approach. So to brainstorm a list of things you might do or thoughts you might pursue, you know, come up with 7. And then, because what happens, you know, I think you're in need of prioritizing specifically what you want to learn, you know, your next most important assumption, so leap of faith in the lean language. And if you haven't already done this, just writing 7 down together on a whiteboard is great because it gets you past the, any of us can come up with 2 or 3 ideas and thoughts very quickly. If you're tasked to come up with 7, you start having to go deep, and you might come up, the 5th, 6th, or 7th thing you put up there might turn out to be the best. So it's a little bit of the go broad and then you narrow. But as an example, the important thing is, you guys tell us, but as an example, if you decided your most important thing to learn is if a person that was in need got a loan from a community, and yet you'd have to have a point of view, right? That's where the list of your point of view is narrowed down to 1, or at least a sequential steps of experimentation. You know, you're not going to only do 1 experiment, but you might be at the stage of just doing 1 at a time. You know, what you could do is, just as an example, of top of your list was, we want to learn whether this person, if this person at the point of need gets the loan from a community they feel good about, will they repay it in a certain time frame? Then you start getting to an assumption and a hypothesis that you can make into a test that's measurable. And that's where we like to get our teams. So just as an example, this is my guess, but you coming up with the thing you're most passionate about learning next could translate to, okay, well then, if that's our point of view, this community that looks kind of friendly and may even include people they know, you know, then let's set that up. And in this case, you might need to intercept people in front of a payday loan. You know, you've already been pretty scrappy about that type of thing. But if you have that targeted user who's exactly what you want to learn, that target user, instead of starting with, we got to find 1,000 people, since you still have some really fundamental ideas, they're solid. You know, it's a big problem, but there's some things you laid out you haven't proven to yourselves yet with an experiment. Yeah, you can find that target user, catch them at the right moment. Just as an example, you may come up with a better experiment you care more about, and then have something like, you could even have a FACO back end, right? This is where you get to be extremely creative. You could ask Intuit for $100 or $200. Seriously, you know. So we want our innovators thinking about, well, let's not assume you have no budget, and maybe you could find a target user that doesn't need all that much money, and have a real appearing community lend them the money, if that fits your hypothesis, and then see what happens and measure it. Just as an example of how you probably could get to a lean experiment with this type of thing.
I think the framework you laid out there is really important, Jeff. I think, you know, one thing I would add to what you said is, I think for you guys as a team, the sooner you can get to actually having a single person that's in need that gets a loan from a community of people, as soon as you guys can get to actually doing that, the sooner you're going to start learning. And so, you know, we already touched on you guys getting some empathy for that other side of the market, which I think is really valuable for the folks that are looking for a loan. Getting some additional empathy. So, like Jeff said, it may require some intercepts or some, like, hey, who of our friends, who do you know that's using payday loans or whatever, right? Like, get us in front of those people. But then being able to actually go and run your whole idea end to end, take a single iteration of it and say, great, we've got this one person that we just promised we're going to get them a loan at a lower rate than this payday place. And now we've got to go to the other side of the market, and we've got to go talk to a bunch of people and say, here's the profile of the person that wants to learn or wants to get a loan. How much will you loan for them, right? And we're going to collect it all up, and we're going to get back to you, right? You don't need any sort of technology in there. It could be a piece of paper with the person's picture on it and the amount of loan they need, right? But like, envision how you could basically execute this entire thing end to end as a single test, and then align that with the things Jeff's talking about, which is figure out what the most important thing is you need to learn, and then use that model to learn those things really, really quickly. And it may not be that you execute the whole thing to learn it. It might be you execute a piece of it, but understanding that, like, here's manually how I could execute the whole thing will free you up mentally to be able to then move more quickly, because you know that, like, you guys had to come up with probably some creative ways to stand in front of the payday loan people and promise people a lower rate, right? And so if you know that you could actually provide that for real, even if it's completely manual, you can now make promises to those people and actually fulfill those promises, right? So you actually start building your customer base one customer at a time.
I'm going to take the contrarian view.
Thanks, Rick.
What Jeff and Aaron said is absolutely true, okay? But when I say the contrarian view, what I heard is that you don't know your customer well enough. And to me, when you don't know your customer well enough, you need to have more customer empathy. And the purpose of customer empathy to me is understanding their problems and what are they doing to solve those problems today. And when you get to experimentation, to me, the purpose of experimentation is to test the riskiest assumptions. And I don't think it's a very risky assumption that someone would borrow through some other form if it was cheaper and easier to get money. I don't think that's a risky assumption. I think that's pretty common sense that would take place. I think your risky assumption is that people in the community will lend that money to them, right? I think the risky assumption is that they will pay it back. I think those are probably your riskier assumptions. So to me, I would go out and actually just have conversations with both of your target markets until you get to understand what they view as the problems, how they speak about the problems, how they speak about the risks, how they speak about what it would feel like to help out someone in their community. You haven't learned enough, to me, to run experiments, because they will give you the answers if you have conversations with them. Too many times when I'm talking with anyone that hasn't done lean experiments before, they miss the customer development piece. And the customer development piece is getting to know, in this case, both sides of the equation. You need to understand the borrower and how they think about it and what they're going through and why are they going out to get a payday loan, and are there any other solutions that they came up with and tried before they went to get a payday loan? Like, did they already go to their family and ask for a loan and this is their last resort? Or, what other things did they try? So that you truly understand what they're going through. So that's number one. Number two, you have to find a way to get in touch with the community at large. And if you aren't a part of this community and you don't have a way to get in touch with this community, you can use other communities as a proxy. So for instance, you guys mentioned a couple of times that you're not a part of this community. Well, you are still human beings. You still could express a need to borrow money, and you could see if your networks are willing to lend you that money. If they're not willing to lend it to you, and you know what kind of credit risk you are, and that you would pay them back, then what are the odds that someone that's in a very deep financial crisis would have a network that would lend them money? You can try things through proxy like that. But ultimately, you guys are right. You do want to get in front of your exact target market, and I think that eventually you do want to go out in front of a payday loan place or some other way to connect with the exact target market that has the need. But if you don't have the feedback, and if you haven't done the customer development on the lender side, on the people who would give the money, you're missing, I think, the most important part of the equation and the highest risk part of the equation. So I would encourage you to have those conversations, not in a test format, but purely in a conversational mode to see what they think the issues are. And then you can create tests around those issues to see if they can be overcome or not.
I think that's really helpful. I think we haven't really opened up the conversation. We've been trying to stay away from sort of surveys and things, but I think just opening up those conversations and getting that insight would be really helpful. We actually, it's funny you mentioned the experiment of reaching out to our own personal networks. That was actually the first experiment we did, was pretending that our car had been towed from the Intuit parking lot and reaching out to our personal network to lend us money. And so we have done experiments like that, and I think what we're struggling with now is, are the learnings from those experiments enough to translate into the community of our target customer? Or if not, how do we learn from our target customer? And I think actually just going out there and having conversations with them without necessarily doing an experiment on them might be sort of the best first step.
My personal belief is that having conversations is always the best first step. We're always jumping into running lean experiments first because it's fun and exciting, and it gives us real proof. Like, these conversations won't give you real proof, but they give you the information you need to create the experiments. And if you don't have that information, it's very hard. You're then guessing at what experiment to create. So I encourage you to spend time to talk to 10 or 15 or 20 people in the target markets, and you've got 2 target markets here, right? I think that your biggest risk is on the lender side, so I would focus more of my energy on interviewing those folks and asking them, would they be willing to do this? What are the risks? Why wouldn't they do it? Why would they do it? What type of people would they do it for? And it's just generic information, and you can't do this, even though it's even though I just listed off some questions there. You do not want to do a questionnaire. You want to have a conversation with them. Because that is how you elicit the greatest amount of information, and you might even uncover a nugget that you never even thought of. They will help you solve the problem if you actually listen. So the key is to getting them to talk, and your questions should just be in a conversational mode, based upon what they said, not based upon a list that you brought with you, if that makes sense.
So I got. I know Jeff probably has some coaching wrap-up things that he'd like to be able to interject. I think you've been doing a great job of kind of role modeling and getting some of the meta coaching suggestions out there for folks as well. So we're at about the top of the hour, so to transition over into some of that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see we've used up the available time. I guess, so there is a question to the team, and I will give this headline too, which is talking to multiple coaches at once. I'm sure it could be confusing. So one thing we always tell teams also is that, look, you got input, and you don't have to take it. You feel free to do what you want to do. The coaching is just input. So that's important. And then before I ask are you more passionate or less passionate about the project question, I would say that, it's very likely that Rick really just did hit an important nail right on the head. I know part of the process around first coming up with an idea and then doing, we call them lean start-in. It's something Aaron himself and Ben Blank originated that you went through earlier in the summer, is getting out there and doing customer development and talking to people. So I think my very quick interpretation is Rick found something very interesting in that you don't feel you've done enough of that, and I think a good coaching point is you could benefit from more of that. Even though it was part of our process, a process is an approximation, so your team could go back to that step and develop insights. So that's basically, for me, that ties it together in that, hey, listening carefully to a team and seeing if the customer interview, customer development, customer observation is very important as well. Did enough of that happen, or are you struggling because a little more of that can happen before you go out and build a minimum viable product? So that's just what struck me, again, an opinion on the process, but the real question is, so how are you feeling right now as a team? More passionate, less passionate? How's it working for you?
Personally, I feel great because a lot of these pieces of advice have actually been the same from several of our different coaching sessions. So I think that we have a more clear picture of where to go next, and I really appreciate your time today.
That was a more passionate?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, you know us, we tabulate everything. We're going to be putting out bar charts and stuff, so yeah, we have to count this quite accurately.
And Alex, for you personally, and I want your other team members to sort of ignore your answer here so they give their own, but I'm curious, for you personally, what do you think the team should do next? What's your opinion based on everything you heard, what's your gut reaction?
My gut reaction is that we need to go to a payday loan office and try to intercept customers that frequent those places and try to understand their problems more sincerely.
Got it.
We watched a documentary called Spent that covers the payday loan issue, and that was a good 40 minutes and a strong insight into the problem, but I think really speaking to multiple sources would solidify our understanding. And then from there, maybe we can build a more insightful experiment.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And how about your feedback on the session, Becca?
I mean, I started out really passionate. I think our whole team started out this summer, deciding we wanted to tackle a really big problem, and we're really passionate about this one. But I think, yes, I'm definitely more passionate now. And I guess in terms of what we should do next, I agree with Alex. I think we should do some more sort of customer research or customer conversations, or really spend some time in that market. And then I think the next best step is even like pre-MVP, the like zero tech, bring a customer through the funnel after we've had some conversations with them and try to understand their concerns, and then like zero tech, like physically go out and go, how much money do you need to borrow, and then walk over to the people who can lend it and be like, how much money are you willing to lend, and really try to see, how that would work before ever trying to build it, create it, spend a lot of resources invested in creating an MVP.
Great, thank you. And Tuan?
Yeah, I'd have to echo both Becca and Alex's sentiments when it comes to being more passionate for this problem. I think in terms of next steps, one thing that Richard mentioned that really kind of struck us that was new for coaching was to actually reach out and get some customer empathy with the lenders. That's not something that we actually consider actually receive much feedback on. And so in terms of next steps, I think that's definitely something we want to consider and definitely go forth with in terms of learning more about what lenders are actually caring about, what issues they actually might have with the actual process itself.
Got it. Good stuff. Are we wrapped on the coaching? Everybody good? Anybody have any other comments, concerns, questions, things you want to throw in? Cool. One tip that I'd throw out for you guys is similar to what you're doing with the experiments. It sounds like you're running those quick and scrappy and those kinds of things. Is don't let yourself get sucked into pure research mode, right? So go get some empathy. Decide beforehand a specific number of customers we're going to interact with. Digest that information, look at it, figure out, do we have enough where we can go run an experiment or not? Do we need to go get more empathy? But don't get sucked into like pure research mode, because I think that it's sort of human nature to get lost in soft and squishy land with the customers, and so just be really careful that you're time boxing yourselves as you go through it. So you did a starting amount, you ran some experiments, you're like, we're a little wobbly, now let's go get some more, see if we can get less wobbly, run some more experiments, and it's sort of it's a natural sort of back and forth with the process.
If I could jump in here and just say something on a personal note to you guys, this team, I admire you guys for taking on such a big problem that will help millions of people. So kudos to you guys for having the courage to go after something really big. It's an audacious goal, and I love it. and I wish you the best of luck in solving this problem.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, thank you all very much for your time, and thank you for joining us. For those of you watching, if you learned something valuable from this, please either thumbs up the video or share this or tweet it or do a +1 on Google. I don't care, whatever platform you're on. I know there's a bunch of them. But if you found something valuable in this, share with us what was valuable to you so that we can do more of it in the future. We want to make sure that we're providing as much value as possible in these sessions. And join us next week. We will have Chief Operating Officer Seth Berkowitz from Edmunds.com with us, and we will dive in deeper on this whole. What did you call us, Jeff? Lean geeks. We'll do some more lean geekery.
Oh no! I hope it doesn't stick. Sorry about that.
No, it's good. I like it. I like it. All right, awesome. And we are going to wrap up. Thank you all for your time, and we'll talk to you soon. Good luck on the project.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye-bye.